I want a divorce. My wife said those words to me with a sad expression, as if she didn't really mean it. But there was nothing I could do, and we divorced. A few years later, I saw something shocking. Maria. It was my ex-wife, homeless in a park. When I questioned her, she started crying and confessed something that filled me with rage. There was a terrifying reason behind our divorce. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Revenge Office. Today, I'm going to share a new story with you. Let's get started. My name is Chris. I'm 30 years old. I work as an editor at a publishing company. I've always been a quiet person, the kind who reads comics and books in the corner of the classroom, occasionally getting teased by classmates. My friend Daniel, who was also quiet, often spent breaks with me. Though honestly, we didn't have anyone else to hang out with, and our seats were close, so we just kind of ended up together. Hey, good morning, Daniel. Every morning, he would sit next to me, and I would greet him without much thought. But Daniel would always look down and didn't seem to want to talk. He often glared at the other students or the teachers and would mutter complaints under his breath. I didn't know Daniel all that well, but it seemed like people thought we were close. Eventually, Daniel stopped coming to school. Daniel's absent again today. Hey, Chris, you were close with him, right? Can you take this handout to him? Hey, look, Chris and Daniel, the boring duo. Some classmates would mock us like that. Sometimes, I take the handouts to Daniel's home. He lived with his mother in an apartment complex in a rough part of town. Even though I brought the handouts, the doorbell seemed broken, and no one ever answered when I pressed it. No one came to the door, so I just slipped the handouts into the rusty mailbox and went home. I never saw Daniel again before graduation. I graduated without ever seeing him again. I was never good at standing out, and I ended my youth without any romantic experiences, barely even talking to women. Now that I'm working, I have to deal with all kinds of people, so I've learned to manage. But deep down, even at 30, my personality hasn't changed. I still don't like noisy places or loud, outgoing people. They remind me too much of high school. I originally joined a publishing company because I loved reading and written words. I had hoped to work in proofreading, doing final checks for any inconsistencies in the text. But the fashion magazine department was short-staffed, so they assigned me, a newbie, there. I wasn't interested in fashion, and honestly, my style was pretty bad. Yet here I was, working in the women's fashion magazine editorial department. Life sure is unpredictable. Even though I wondered why someone like me, who had no interest in fashion, was here, I ended up enjoying the work and felt that I was suited for it. The editor-in-chief was strict but kind and very dedicated to the job. Some of my colleagues even helped me choose casual clothes to improve my look. I've been able to continue because I'm lucky to work with such great people. You may not be flashy, but you're incredibly sincere. My mother always found something good in me and praised me while raising me. That's right. Sincerity is the most important quality when it comes to work, isn't it? I kept telling myself that as I quietly went about my job in a glamorous workplace. Then one day, I got a call from a talent agency, and I was the one who ended up handling it. Thank you for waiting. This is Chris from the editorial department. Sorry to bother you during your busy time. I'm Brown, the head of a talent agency. I thought the last name was unusual, but as I listened, the tone of the person's voice suddenly changed. Wait, Are you Chris? I froze for a moment, hearing my first name being called out of nowhere. Sorry, yes. Don't you remember me? It's me, Daniel Brown. Hearing his full name, I finally realized who he was. It was hard to believe this was the same Daniel who spent his school days in the corner of the classroom like me, bad-mouthing our classmates. His voice, now sociable and cheerful, was the complete opposite of the gloomy image I had of him. I had heard rumors that he dropped out of high school and moved to New York to find work, but I never imagined he had started a talent agency. Though a bit bewildered by this chance encounter, I accepted his invitation, and we arranged to have dinner together that evening. While I had shared school lunches with Daniel before, we hardly ever had a real conversation. With work-related talk already out of the way, I was a bit nervous about what we would discuss, but I hurried to finish my tasks and headed to the restaurant he had chosen. The meeting spot was a newly opened dining bar, a popular place bustling with young women and couples. A waiter led me to a private room away from prying eyes. "Your guest has arrived," the waiter said. As I entered the glamorous, Instagram-worthy room, I couldn't believe my eyes. A man dressed in trendy fashion, with the same hairstyle as a popular boy band, wearing luxurious shoes and a designer watch, was flanked by two tall, gorgeous women. The moment he saw me, he raised one hand in greeting. "Chris, man, you haven't changed at all." His lively demeanor was completely different from the Daniel I knew in school. "Daniel, I almost didn't recognize you. You look, well, pretty handsome." Shocked by his transformation, that was all I could manage to say. Back in school, Daniel wore glasses, was overweight, had acne, and hated the world with a bitter, resentful attitude. I still remember the time when classmates threw the book he was reading out the window, and he glared at them, shaking with anger as he went to pick it up. Daniel used to look at those classmates, who were enjoying their shining youth, with jealousy from the shadows, cursing under his breath. But now, Daniel wouldn't look out of place among those same classmates. I can only imagine how shocked they'd be to see him now. I was a total nerd back then. "Hey, don't bring that up in front of these girls." Daniel kept the conversation lively, and the women around him laughed out loud at his jokes. It was easy to imagine the incredible effort it must have taken to get to this point. I found myself genuinely respecting Daniel. He introduced the women around us as his agency's exclusive models. Each woman was tall and had long, slender limbs. The two sitting on either side of him were his top earners. They all called him Daniel and seemed to genuinely admire him, though Daniel enjoyed chatting with the models. There were moments when he'd stare off with an unfocused gaze, making it hard to read his thoughts. Watching him, I felt an inexplicable sense of unease. It was as if he still carried the same dark energy from his school days, only stronger. "And this one here is Maria, our rising star," Daniel said, introducing her. The woman named Maria smiled at me. In that moment, I felt a lightning strike of emotion. Her porcelain skin, large eyes, and delicate yet strong-willed aura left me stunned. It was probably the first time in my 30 years that I had experienced love at first sight. This is my first time at this place, but it's really nice. I was so captivated that I stared in silence, then hurriedly responded, "This place is pretty popular, right? It's my first time here too." Maria laughed warmly at my awkwardness, her unpretentious charm revealing a natural inner beauty. Unlike the other models, she didn't seem to idolize Daniel, standing tall and speaking to him as an equal. She grew up in a seaside town and had been scouted as a model during a summer trip with friends. After graduating from high school, she moved to New York to pursue her modeling career full time. She told me she loves cooking, and when she visits home, she always prepares homemade meals for her family. After just a brief conversation, I found myself even more captivated by her. "Are you still single, Chris?" Daniel asked, watching me. "No, I'm not seeing anyone," I replied. "Women are all idiots. Don't let them fool you, okay?" Daniel said this with wide eyes and a grin, and I couldn't tell if he was joking or serious. I was so shocked by his comment that I didn't know how to respond. "Come on, what's that supposed to mean, Daniel? You're so harsh," one of the women teased. One of the women tried to laugh it off and calm the situation, but Daniel suddenly became serious. He slowly picked up the ashtray on the table, then abruptly stood up. "What? Are you saying I'm wrong? You think you can tell me what to do?" He stood intimidatingly in front of the woman, and the room felt deathly silent. Her face turned pale, and it looked like she was about to cry. Just then, the door to the private room opened, and a cheerful waiter with light-colored hair spoke up. "Excuse me, it's time for you to wrap things up and leave." The moment Daniel heard that voice, his demeanor shifted. He smiled and turned to me. "Man, today brought back some memories. I'll cover the bill." Then, turning to the models, he shouted loudly, "All right, next stop, we're heading to the usual club, Maria. What about you?" Maria looked directly at Daniel and answered, "I've had too much to drink, so I'm heading home. Thanks for the meal." During our earlier conversation, she had mentioned that she didn't like crowds or noisy places and usually avoided them whenever she could. The other models said nothing and quietly followed Daniel. Daniel told me, "I'll be in touch," before disappearing into the underground club with the models in tow. What was that strange atmosphere earlier? It felt like the models were actually afraid of Daniel. Though he looked completely different from his school days, it seemed like the core of who he was hadn't changed at all. I didn't know Daniel that well, but it felt like there was some intense negative energy that controlled him. "Is Daniel always like that?" I asked. "I just recently transferred to this agency, so I don't know much about him. He's always really kind to me, but to the other models, he can be pretty harsh." Worried about Maria working under Daniel, I gathered the courage to ask for her contact info. We started exchanging messages and phone calls, and eventually, we went out to eat together a few times. Despite our busy schedules, I made sure to find time to meet her. Maria was also busy, but she didn't seem to have any issues with Daniel and always talked enthusiastically about her work. She even told me that she found my quiet, sincere approach to work appealing. Later, I mustered the greatest courage of my life and confessed my feelings to Maria, and we began dating. Shortly after, we moved into a sunny apartment together and started living together. Since we both had demanding jobs and rarely saw each other, it was Maria's idea to move in to spend more time together. "When I'm with you, Chris, I feel like I don't have to try so hard. You always make me feel at peace," she said. "I've never felt so comfortable being with someone until I met you." Over time, I began to feel that I wanted to protect Maria for the rest of my life. Maria had asked me to keep our relationship a secret from Daniel. This was because his talent agency had a strict no relationships policy. Anyone who broke this rule had to leave the agency immediately. So if we were to get married, it would mean she'd have to quit the agency. Deep down, I wanted her to leave Daniel's agency as soon as possible. Then, one day, after successfully completing a major project at work, I gathered all my courage and proposed to Maria. Maria, I have something important to ask you. What is it? You're so serious all of a sudden. Will you marry me? You can leave the agency and take a break from modeling. I'll support you. Tears welled up in Maria's eyes as she happily accepted my proposal. I guess my new agency will be wherever Chris is, she said, smiling joyfully as she agreed to marry me. The next day, as I watched her eagerly preparing to go to work, excited to tell Daniel the news, my heart was full of happiness. Lately, Daniel had been in a bad mood, and Maria left the house nervously, saying, I have to make sure I don't catch him at the wrong time. I watched her go, then started getting ready for work myself. However, when Maria came home later, she didn't seem as cheerful. You've worked so hard. Were you able to leave the agency without any problems? Well, actually, to my surprise, Daniel had tried to stop Maria from quitting after hearing about our marriage. He convinced her that since newlyweds often need money, there was no need for her to leave the agency right away. He even told her she was an exception and didn't have to quit. Why was Maria being treated differently? Maria said she still enjoyed her modeling work, so even though something didn't feel right to me, I had no choice but to accept it. Eventually, we got married and began building our happy life together. We were blessed with the support of family and friends, and everything seemed to be going perfectly. The morning we planned to go furniture shopping, something we had been looking forward to for a while, Maria said, Chris, I'm sorry, I can't make it to our date today. What? Work? Yeah, a last-minute shoot came up. Even though we had been excited about it, I understood there wasn't much she could do. About 6 months into our marriage, Maria started coming home late, and sometimes she would leave after I'd already gone to bed. Modeling jobs can be unpredictable. It wasn't unusual for her to have shoots early in the morning or late at night. Got it. Just don't overdo it. Take care of yourself, I said. Thanks. I watched Maria, who seemed somewhat relieved, leave the house, and then I collapsed onto the bed. As an editor, I understood her work and wanted to support her. But honestly, I was really looking forward to our plans, so it was disappointing. That day, I went to look at furniture alone and bought a few items I thought Maria would like. However, Maria didn't come home that night. I called her, but she didn't pick up, and my messages were left unread. Had something happened to her? Feeling anxious, I was getting ready for work when Maria called. Are you okay? Yeah, sorry for worrying you. The shoot ran late, so I ended up staying at a friend's place. Hearing the nervous tone in Maria's voice, I felt both relief and a nagging worry. Was she hiding something? Up until now, no matter how late work ran, she always came home. Lately, something seemed off. I couldn't keep living with this uncertainty, so I decided we needed to sit down and talk. When I arrived at work, a colleague from the women's magazine department hesitantly approached me. Colleague, the head of that talent agency we worked with was spotted leaving a hotel with one of his models, and well, what I saw in the picture was Daniel and Maria leaving a hotel together. Maria, cheating. The reality in front of me was too hard to accept, and I was suddenly overwhelmed by nausea, rushing to the bathroom. I couldn't focus on work that day, and the editor in chief, noticing something was wrong, sent me home early. When I finally made it home, I stood frozen at the door, too scared to open it. I kept telling myself it had to be some kind of mistake. Forcing myself to move, I opened the door and walked into the living room, where Maria was. "You're not cheating with Daniel, right? Tell me it's not true." Maria stared at me, pale and speechless. "Tell me it's not true. It has to be a mistake, right?" Maria stared at me, saying nothing as I pressed her for answers. "Say something, please." My voice trembled with desperation, even though I felt pathetic. "It's true. I cheated with Daniel." Her cold words cut through me like knives, and I felt like my whole body was being slashed apart. I couldn't stay on my feet and collapsed into the nearby chair. The small items I had bought for Maria just yesterday fell to the floor with a loud crash, still unopened. I felt something warm run down my cheek and realized I was crying. "What did I do wrong? I'll change. Just please, don't cheat anymore." I couldn't bear the thought of losing the woman I loved so much. I couldn't even look at her to see her expression. "I want a divorce." I couldn't believe my ears as Maria spoke those words, and then she began talking in a calm, detached tone. She said that Daniel, with his flashy looks and confident personality, was a better match for her as a model than I was. Maria, who once told me that being with me made her feel at peace. Maria, who once said she didn't like flashy people. It's a lie, why? "I just don't find you attractive anymore. Let's just hurry up and get divorced." The Maria yelling in front of me seemed like a completely different person from the one I knew. But somehow, it didn't feel genuine, as if someone had put those words in her mouth. No matter what I said, she kept insisting, "I want a divorce." And I slowly came to realize that if this was truly what she wanted, I had no choice. Just 6 months into our marriage, we were getting a divorce. The next day, Maria silently handed me the divorce papers, already filled out. I wanted to believe it was all just a bad dream. As I sat there, unable to bring myself to sign, Maria looked like she wanted to say something, but stopped herself. With a strained expression, she said, "Chris, sign it." I couldn't hold back the tears anymore and started crying. "Why do we have to divorce? Isn't there anything we can do?" I knew it wasn't manly, but I really didn't want to let Maria go. Maria looked at me with a sad expression. "I'm sorry. It's not you. I'm in love with Daniel." It must have been painful for Maria to say it so clearly. "I understand. If that makes you happy, I won't say anything more." With tears blurring my vision, I signed the divorce papers. Everything moved quickly after that. In just a few days, our divorce was finalized, and Maria left to be with Daniel. The sense of loss left me unable to eat or sleep for a while. Whenever I spaced out, Maria and Daniel's faces would pop into my mind. I realized that keeping busy stopped me from thinking about her. So I threw myself into work, so much so that my colleagues and editor-in-chief began to worry. I couldn't bring myself to return to the house full of memories of Maria, so I started sleeping at the office most nights. Then one day, the stress finally caught up with me, and I came down with a high fever, bedridden for a week. I dreamed of Maria. She looked at me with sad eyes, as if she wanted to say something. Chris, help me. I suddenly woke up, unsure if it was a dream or reality, but I could have sworn I heard that voice right next to my ear. I must have had a terrible nightmare as I was drenched in sweat and breathing heavily. That felt so real. Still in a daze, I found myself unconsciously looking around for Maria, even though I knew she wasn't there. As I scanned the room, I realized how messy it had become, with clothes tossed everywhere and trash scattered around. This apartment, which Maria and I had shared when we first started living together, now felt way too big for just me. I can't stay stuck in the past forever. I decided to move forward. A few days later, after my fever had subsided, I moved out of the apartment where I had lived with Maria and into a small studio near my office. Years passed, and I used the pain of my divorce as motivation to throw myself into work, eventually becoming editor-in-chief. The man who had once been clueless about fashion was now the editor of a fashion magazine. Life really is unpredictable. One evening, after a night out with coworkers, I was walking down a street I didn't usually take, heading toward the main road to catch a taxi. That's when I glanced at a nearby park and saw a woman huddled on a bench who looked just like Maria. Maria. I muttered to myself as I approached, and there, sitting before me, was Maria, looking completely changed. Her hair was messy, and her clothes were torn. She was huddled on a bench with what looked like cardboard underneath her. But when she sensed my presence, she lifted her head slightly and our eyes met. Her gaze was sad, as if she were silently asking for help. I quickly looked away, forcing myself not to feel sympathy, and walked past her. There were days when I had hated Maria for cheating on me with Daniel and abandoning me. The Maria who had called me a boring man was now sitting there, looking like a broken, homeless person. I thought I would feel a sense of satisfaction or justice, but instead, I felt nothing of the sort. That night, I couldn't sleep at all, my mind replaying the image of Maria over and over. What had happened since our divorce? Hadn't she been living happily with Daniel? When did she start living like a homeless person in the park? The next day, as soon as I got to work, I asked my colleague from the weekly magazine department if he knew anything about Maria. Apparently, Maria had quit modeling shortly after our divorce. I thought about telling you, but you were so depressed at the time, I couldn't bring myself to say anything. He admitted he felt guilty for taking the photos that had led to our divorce. After finishing work, I headed to the park where I had seen Maria yesterday. She was sitting on the same bench as before. Maria. At the sound of my voice, she flinched and looked at me. "You came yesterday, didn't you?" She whispered quietly. "Yeah, but I panicked and ran away," I answered honestly. Maria stayed silent, her head down. After a long silence, I gathered my courage and asked her, "What happened?" As soon as I said those words, tears began to fall from Maria's eyes, and she started explaining. It turned out that when she told Daniel about our marriage, he confessed his feelings to her. "I've loved you not as a model, but as a woman this whole time. Forget Chris. You'd be so much happier with me." But even though she was shocked, Maria had firmly rejected him on the spot. Daniel seemed to give up, but he was relentless in convincing Maria to stay at the agency, and she reluctantly agreed. However, from that day on, her treatment worsened noticeably. She was given lower pay than the standard under various excuses. And even when she complained to Daniel, he wouldn't take her seriously. feeling that she couldn't keep working there. Maria told Daniel she wanted to quit, but he told her that if she broke the agreement early, she would have to pay an enormous penalty. But there was nothing about that in the original agreement. Maria said. When she confronted Daniel, he shoved the agreement in front of her that included the penalty clause, and there was her signature on it. She didn't remember signing it, but maybe she had overlooked it. She wasn't given a copy of the agreement, so she had no proof and no way to fight it. "Why didn't you tell to me about this?" I held my head in frustration. Daniel's been a friend since forever, and he threatened me, saying, "You know what'll happen if you tell Chris," she said. Desperate to leave the agency, Maria eventually gave in to Daniel's demands and went to a hotel with him. That was the moment the tabloids had caught on camera. No matter the reason, the fact remained that she had betrayed me. When the tabloid contacted Daniel, telling him the story would go public, Maria chose to leave me, believing she could no longer stay by my side. Manipulated by her guilt, Daniel threatened her, saying that if she didn't obey him, he would expose everything. She had fallen into a terrifying, inescapable trap. Daniel took advantage of Maria's inability to fight back, summoning her to private drinking parties and late-night meetings under the guise of business. The constant pressure and exhaustion began to take a toll on Maria, causing her to make mistakes, showing up late to photo shoots and mixing up meetings. One day, Daniel suddenly fired her without cause, and due to the fraudulent agreement, she was forced to pay a massive penalty. At this point, Maria was no longer able to think clearly. Burdened with an overwhelming debt, Daniel attempted to introduce her to nightclubs and drag her into the nightlife industry. But she managed to escape and started living in the park. As Maria told her story, I felt dizzy from the sheer awfulness of it all. I took her home, feeding her and drawing her a bath, while she cried and apologized repeatedly. Once she had calmed down, we talked about what to do next. Maria was terrified, too afraid even to mention Daniel's name, saying she just wanted to disappear and never deal with him again. But I couldn't forgive Daniel for taking advantage of Maria's pure heart and ruining her life. "I'll protect you, no matter what. We have to stop him before he hurts anyone else." I said this over and over until Maria finally agreed, showing a firm resolve to fight back, saying, "I don't want to just suffer in silence." And so, we decided to confront Daniel together. First, we organized everything that had happened to Maria in chronological order and gathered as much evidence as possible. We also interviewed her fellow models. As it turned out, several other models had left the agency in recent years. These models had also been mistreated by Daniel, either being forced out or pressured to leave voluntarily. They had remained silent, accepting their fate, but once we took action, they offered to help. After spending a few days preparing, gathering statements from the models, and equipping ourselves with a voice recorder just in case, Maria and I headed to Daniel's office. The moment Daniel saw us, he smirked and said, "I'm surprised you even have the guts to show your face here." I could feel Maria tense up beside me. "I know everything Maria told me. What you did is unforgivable." I confronted him about the penalty fees and the forged agreement, but Daniel kept denying everything, saying, "There's no proof." He stared at me with cold, unfocused eyes. "There are others besides Maria who are accusing you of altering agreements. You won't be able to weasel your way out of this." Daniel snorted and then suddenly widened his eyes, shouting hysterically, "Who's going to believe you without proof? I got to where I am by doing things this way. Models are just my pawns, and when they don't listen to me, they complain about bad treatment. They got exactly what they deserved. Don't mess with me. Do you even understand what you've done to people's lives?" Maria had sacrificed herself and ended up broken because of this man. "I went through hell because of you, and Maria paid an enormous penalty and became homeless because of it." Daniel laughed loudly when he heard that. "Because of me, that's her own fault. You think someone like you, who's never worked for anything, deserves to be happy?" Then, as if a dam had broken, Daniel began ranting about his hatred for the world. He explained how, back in school, he was mocked by classmates for being an awkward guy, and girls avoided him, calling him gross. When he turned to his teacher for help, he got a response he never expected. "Don't you think part of the problem is you? Maybe you should try paying more attention to your appearance." That was when Daniel's heart broke completely. In his eyes, looks were everything. The beautiful, vibrant people in life were always favored, no matter the situation. Even when they did wrong, they were never held accountable. Even the adults, who should have been fair, never stood up for someone like him just because of how he looked. Daniel became convinced that appearances were everything. He observed the people who fit that mold and worked hard to become like them. He also swore revenge on women who, like the girls who had mocked him back then, were beautiful on the outside. "I can't beat men with strength, but I can beat women. The moment I lost weight and changed my looks, those stupid women flocked to me. I tricked them, broke them down, and pushed them into nightlife and sex work." As he continued bragging, Daniel even admitted to forging agreements and faking signatures. "I made sure to record everything. I had let him speak freely to gather proof of his actions, capturing his confessions. That's enough. I understand now how much you hate the world, but this ends here." When I told him I was going to report everything, Daniel let out a laugh that quickly turned into a horrific screech as he lunged at me. "Stop it," Maria cried out, shielding me with her body. Realizing he could no longer escape, or perhaps feeling like he had nothing left to lose, Daniel grabbed an ashtray and swung it violently at our heads. I don't remember anything after that. When I woke up, I was in a hospital. Maria was asleep beside me, her head resting on the bed. The TV was filled with news about Daniel Brown's arrest, and the dark scandals of the entertainment industry were making headlines everywhere. Apparently, I had been hit multiple times with the ashtray, and Daniel was arrested by the police who arrived at the scene. Maria, armed with a voice recorder, worked with her former model colleagues to leak the story to the tabloids. More of Daniel's wrongdoings came to light, and everything was exposed to the public. There were even features about Daniel's unfortunate and troubled childhood, as well as his dysfunctional family life. The media was flooded with coverage on the topic. Daniel had lived such a miserable life that it was almost easy to feel sympathy for him, as if something fundamental had been missing in him. But that didn't justify destroying other people's lives. The agency went bankrupt, leaving behind massive debt. It took me some time to recover before I could be discharged. But thanks to Maria visiting me every day and taking care of me, I healed without any lasting effects. Maria resumed her career as a freelance model. She was even selected for major billboard ads and was living a fulfilling life. When I was finally discharged, Maria and I reaffirmed our love for each other and decided to remarry. After going through such intense experiences, I was certain that no matter how much time passed, I would always love Maria. We vowed to keep walking together, determined to protect the happiness we had almost lost. The hardships and detours we had faced only strengthened our bond, and we came to realize that our love was real. We also promised to always trust each other, no matter what,